Here's the difficult part. You cannot control if your partner is going to be honest with you or not. Maybe your partner has already started to exhibit more honesty. If they have disclosed this to you and brought it forward without being pressured or without evidence towards it, there's a high likelihood that they are moving on a path of more honesty. But if you are having to navigate this, hello and welcome to the Complex Couples Podcast. I'm Heidi. I'm a couples therapist and relationship coach specializing in mixed orientation marriages and mixed gender identity relationships. Whether you're just discovering this reality or you've been on this journey for a long time, this is the space where your marriage matters, your values matter, and your choices matter. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Complex Couples Podcast, the place for mixed orientation and mixed gender identity marriages. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you're bravely facing the tough questions about your relationship. I'm Heidi, a marriage and family therapist and your relationship coach. My comments today are tailored to you who are straight spouses in a mixed orientation or mixed gender identity marriage. Today, I'm going to be looking at a question that a lot of people have, and that question is, how do I get over the anger I feel at my spouse for keeping this secret from me? And let me start just by saying that anger is a really natural feeling when you find out that reality is not the same as you thought it was. And so if you are experiencing anger and dealing with that right now, that is a very normal response to discovery or disclosure. Often we try to maybe suppress anger or to not feel angry, but the reality is anger is a really important indicator. It's something that tells us that something about this situation needs attention. So simply getting over your anger is more about sweeping things under the rug, which can really cause some resentment later on. So it's not the best option. It's not about just getting over your anger. It's about really taking a look at it. The way I like to see this is it's really like a check engine light in your car. So when that light comes on, a lot of us maybe feel irritated, feel annoyed that we have to look at something. Sometimes we wish it would go away, but the purpose of the light isn't to annoy you. It's trying to tell you something about the system and something that isn't working. So the light itself is not the problem, it's information. And anger works a lot like that. When someone discovers that their spouse has kept a major secret, the anger is often an emotional signal that we really need to look at. It's there to offer us information. But here's where people get stuck. Sometimes people might try to smash that light. They tell themselves they shouldn't feel angry. They try to suppress it and just stop that light, right? Other people becomes obsessed with the light. They might stare at it constantly. They might replay the injury over and over again, but neither of these solutions really fixes the problem. So the real work is looking under the hood so you can discover what this light is actually trying to tell you. That might mean understanding what actually happened, why it happened, and who this person is that you are married to now that you know more information about them. Some of you might be asking the question, well, why would I want to know? Why would I want the specifics? Isn't it good enough just for me to move on from this? My answer to that would be that often that's more a signal of avoidance, which seems helpful in the short term, but in the end, it's not helpful at actually clearing up your mind. And that's really a lot of what this is about. What I mean is some of you may have experienced a bit of a fog from this experience. You might feel a bit like your brain is muddled or there's a lot that you're trying to make sense of. Maybe you're looking back on the past and on things that have happened in your marriage. You're trying to make sense of them. You're trying to determine, was my whole marriage a lie? And the answer to that question is that there's probably a lot that was true in your marriage, and there's some things that maybe were not. And so you're taking this chance to look and see what is what. And the more you're willing to do that, the more clear your brain will get. And essentially, it's a very healing process to determine what is true and what is false. And so taking the time to really look out at the facts, at the data, is going to get you more mental clarity. And you're going to need that in order to essentially determine is this person with whom I am in relationship, are they capable of becoming more honest? Now, we know that they've exhibited a capability of hiding something. And so I'm not trying to call them out and call them liars. All I'm saying is they've exhibited to you, by not disclosing this to you, that they are capable of hiding something. And so that can really get our brain firing and worried about what else could possibly be hiding. And so there's some things that can help clear up your mind regarding this in order to really determine, okay, yes, they were capable of hiding something. Yes, they did hide something, but how are they behaving now versus then? And that is going to really help me determine how to move forward in my relationship. One of the things many people experience after a disclosure like this is that they start replaying years of their marriage in their mind. Moments that felt normal suddenly feel different. They're replaying these scenes and wondering, like, did he know then? Was that real? If he's hiding this, what else could he be hiding? It brings up a lot of questions when we discover something that we didn't already know about someone. And so it's important to actually grapple with those questions and look at and dissect, essentially, what is real and what is not. If you're going through memories like that, you're not crazy. That's a really normal response. But sometimes some of the ways that we cope with that aren't very helpful. And part of the work of moving forward is getting clear and sorting through what actually changed in your understanding of the relationship and what was always true, but now looks different in light of new information. And that process takes time, it takes patience, and it really takes a willingness to look at reality clearly. So let's talk about some obstacles to clarity. One of them is denial. Sometimes people simply want to move on instead of looking because the truth feels too painful. And that's understandable. It can be painful to see the truth, but it's a bit like if you know a hurricane's coming and you just hide in your house rather than maybe evacuating or taking the necessary precautions. It doesn't help to hide from something that is true. And often when we do this, we also carry burdens that are unnecessary burdens for us to carry. One of the problems with denial is that we might take on responsibility for things that aren't ours. And an example of this is my husband actually disclosed his sexuality to a friend 4 years prior to telling me. And that was a really hard thing for me to navigate. And I can talk more about that in future episodes. But one of the things that I attributed to myself that wasn't necessarily true was I told myself that he did that because I wasn't trustworthy. That if I had just been more trustworthy, if I hadn't maybe gossiped so much or talked about things, that maybe he would have felt comfortable telling me. But the problem with that is, there's some truth in it. I did gossip a lot, but it is not the central core reason why my husband did not tell me. The big reason he didn't tell me is the risk was a lot higher. I was his spouse. He knew that there was a potential for loss there that was different than with his friend. And actually telling his friend turned out to be a really helpful tool in our relationship, even though it was really hard for me. But we have to be able to get clear on some of those topics. And if I just looked away from it because it was hurtful to me, I wouldn't have discovered the same things that I discovered by looking closer and discovering what was mine and what wasn't mine about this. Another problem with denial is we might assume things about our partner that aren't true. We might over-attribute blame to them instead of recognizing what is true and what isn't. And an example of that was I worked with a therapist who was very persecutory to my husband, who very much saw him as pulling the wool over my eyes and intentionally deceiving me into marriage. And that actually may be true for some people, and it might have even been partially true for my husband. But the reality is he was living in a lot of denial himself. He had grown up in a very devout religious culture. He had parents who did not talk about sex or sexuality, so he had no space to process that or explore what was going on for him. And he really believed that whatever it is he was feeling would probably go away when he got married. So he didn't really allow space for himself to explore that. My anger might be about something that is actually misunderstood. And so I have to be able to look closer to see, first of all, what is true, what is not, so that I can assign responsibility in the proper places. Again, this is a process that really helps clear up our mind. It helps us essentially process through the trauma that comes from believing something that maybe wasn't true. Let me talk about one of the results of feeling like my husband had duped me. And again, that might be your reality. Your husband may have been well aware, or your husband or wife may have been well aware of what they were experiencing, and they were afraid that you would turn them down if they told you about it up front. And so you're having to face the reality, as I have also faced, that your partner may have been stealing your choice. And that can be an incredibly difficult thing to grapple with. But the way we grapple with that can sometimes cause more harm than good. So it makes sense that you might get really, really angry about that and feel betrayed. That's a reality of the experience. But here's what I often see couples do when they come into my office and there's been a betrayal of some kind. What I see them do is often attack with their anger in the form of questions. So they ask their spouse over and over a million questions about a gazillion different things. And there's a few issues with that. One is that usually it's not so much about getting answers as it is about either punishing or seeking reassurance. The other factor that brings into play is that I'm trying to get my reality from a source that I don't trust. If I have experienced betrayal of some sort, my spouse, who may have been a source of solidity, a source of comfort for me in the past, currently isn't in that position because I'm having a hard time believing what they're saying. So we are moved into a position of actually learning to trust ourselves again, of having to look at what it was that maybe we went blind to. For instance, I have a recollection of at one point in my marriage asking my husband if he had ever been attracted to a man. And my husband got extremely defensive and hot tears filled his eyes and he stormed out of the room. And at that moment, my instinct was something was off, right? It really felt like, okay, that's a strange response for if he hadn't, right? But I wasn't ready to look back then. The reality is I wasn't ready to know. And so I looked away. I, in that moment, decided, you know what? If he wants to tell me, he'll tell me. And I put it on a shelf and I really didn't think about it again. So I've had to force myself to confront those moments when I was willing to go blind. And, there's something very healing about that because I recognize I do have good instincts. I did know that something was there. And my husband's defensiveness was a refusal to tell me because he wasn't ready either. And I really think it's important to really, as much as you can, have compassion for both of you in this situation. You have a right to be angry. They also had a right to be scared. This is not an easy thing to deal with for our spouses. And no one's really given them a path of clarity either. So having compassion for both of you as you navigate this is going to be really, really crucial. And that doesn't mean that I'm excusing deception. I really do believe that honesty is very important in reestablishing trust, and that if your spouse is interested in establishing trust, they're going to start to be honest no matter what. However, I do think I can look with compassion at the difficulty that my spouse was in and recognize the lack of tools, the lack of help, the lack of support he had in grappling with something that was very heavy and that he was ashamed of, and that it wasn't a pleasant experience for him either. So your partner may have felt deeply ashamed. They may have had misunderstandings about marrying someone of the opposite gender that would fix something in them. Or they may have had no one they could talk to about the desires that were plaguing them. And so they may have functioned on instinct or done things that they shouldn't have done. And the reality is, it's important to look at that. I like to say, I think it's best to function in our interactions with grace and truth. Both are really important. So we've talked about the compassion piece, but we also need to talk about truth. Here's the difficult part. You cannot control if your partner is going to be honest with you or not. Maybe your partner has already started to exhibit more honesty. If they have disclosed this to you and brought it forward without being pressured or without evidence towards it, there's a high likelihood that they are moving on a path of more honesty. But if you are having to navigate this by discovery and information that is trickling out a little at a time, and it's mostly when you discover it, and when you do, there's denial, there's defensiveness or stonewalling, you have a pretty good indication that you are not dealing with someone who is maybe willing to be more honest with you, and you're going to have to determine what you want to do about that. What I would encourage you to do first, okay, is to create an environment where it feels safe to be honest. It can be very tempting to criminalize someone who is functioning in a dishonest way. I recently had a client who was very dysregulated because she had asked her husband to make a phone call to the school to talk to them about something with their son. And the husband was resistant because he had already called the school and he felt like not enough time had passed for him to be calling them back. And so he wanted to wait. Now, he was not as clear on this as I am. I want to be clear. He didn't really recognize what was going on for him because he lives kind of in that denial place. So all he knew was that he really didn't want to call the school again. And then when his wife kept pressuring him and kept saying like, no, you need to call the school again. Why haven't you called the school again? She kept just asking him these questions. Eventually he just said, oh, I did call the school again. And she, because she has been lied to in the past and she's experienced deception from him, she looked into it and noticed that there was no call to the school. And so then she was even more angry because she's trying to establish trust. And I don't blame her for being angry. It's a natural reaction. The hard part is the only part she can control is being a person more capable of tolerating honesty. And so the way that she could have done that to create that environment was to recognize that her husband is an adult and he has his own choices, and to maybe express her desires to him in a way that says, hey, this is what I want. I would like for you to try calling the school again. Would you be willing to do that? And accept whatever answer her husband gave her. Now, if she felt like it was really urgent to call the school, she may even make that phone call herself if he didn't feel it was important. But what I am saying is you cannot control the honesty of your partner. You can control if you set up an environment that is conducive and receptive to whatever your partner tells you. And that might give them the space that they need to work on being honest. If you show up as a person who really does want to hear what they have to say, even if it's different than what you want, it might increase their chances of being honest. I don't want to be misunderstood here. I don't want you to think I am excusing dishonesty. The husband's role is to be honest no matter the circumstance in this scenario. There is a responsibility if someone wants to be trusted that they need to be honest. I am merely saying we cannot control that part of the equation. And the way we show up may impact if they start to work on that themselves or if they don't, and give us better data about what to do with the relationship. So a good question to ask yourself might be, what is it like to be honest with me? How do I pressure dishonesty? Work on those things. So, in conclusion, the goal this week is not to make your anger disappear. It's to take a closer look. It's to look under the hood and to start discerning, what am I angry about? And what might be stories and what might be truth here. If you're feeling a lot of anger towards your spouse because of a discovery or a disclosure, that's very understandable. Discovering that something important has been hidden in your marriage is deeply unsettling and can really create a lot of emotional reaction. So this week, instead of trying to get rid of anger, I want you to try something different. When the anger shows up, pause for a moment. Ask yourself 2 questions. What might this anger be trying to tell me? And what do I actually know to be true right now? What are the facts? The things that you could see on a video camera. What are the facts? And what might be a story that I'm telling myself? You might even want to write it down. What I know, what I'm assuming. And then determine an action that will help you get more clarity. As you do that, I hope that you will notice more clarity coming into your mind as you get clear on what are facts and what are assumptions. And you learn more about where your mind might be filling in gaps that aren't true. Sorting out what you actually know from what you might imagine can be really helpful. I encourage you to just take this one step and maybe take the action of trying to create an environment that is conducive to more honesty and to commit to that. And if you need to get out some anger and aggression in a healthy way, go do something, aggressive at the gym. Punching bags, pillows, they can be great for getting out aggression. We want our anger to move us toward the action tendency that's going to be most beneficial to us, but it can be helpful to get out that aggression that it brings up, just not taking it out on the person that you might be hoping to reconcile with or figure out what their potential is. As you try to apply these ideas, I don't expect perfection. You're not going to do it perfectly. None of us do. When you notice yourself slipping back into old ways, just notice it and embrace redos. They're my favorite thing. Ask for a redo. If you let your anger spew out on your partner instead of really settling yourself down and handling things in a way that are more conducive to honesty, it's okay. You're going to have those slip-ups. That's perfectly normal. But if you notice it, try to fix it as soon as you can so that you can get the clarity that you really need. Your value doesn't come from doing this perfectly. Your value exists merely because you are human. And I'm so proud of you for actually taking this on. It's so easy to just be angry, actually, to just blame and to want to indulge our anger and to find a scapegoat. So if you're choosing to do something different, you can be so proud of that hard work. And I think it will help you show up as a person that you respect no matter what happens in your relationship. And that is the ultimate goal. That concludes our episode for today. If you're navigating something like this and want more help thinking clearly about your relationship, I am working on a course that will walk through how to discern truth and how to rebuild confidence in your own judgment. If you want to know when that is available so that you have access or you're interested in other resources, you can join my email list at complexcouplescoaching.com. And feel free to reply to my email with questions. I love getting those because they help guide the content from my podcast in future episodes. Thanks for being here today. You matter, your choices matter, and I value you. You're doing incredible things. Go to it, and we'll see you next time on the Complex Couples podcast.